Welcome back, guys. After probably months of me neglecting to make anything related to scripting, I've decided to do part 4 of the scripting tutorial series. Instead of doing another scripting extra video, I wanted to hit another tutorial video, as the scripting extras are more targeted for people that already know how to do really basic things, and these tutorials are based on people trying to get to that level. And I always get a lot of requests for filtering enabled, and so I thought I'd do that because it's actually very important nowadays for anti-exploiting, and you can also allow for a lot of nice features. So to turn on filtering enabled, you'll go to your Explorer here, and under Workspace, we'll have filtering enabled right here, and you want to enable that. That's all you have to do to turn it on, but there's a lot more you have to do while scripting to make sure that it doesn't break anything. Now, on a default game with nothing in it like this one, nothing will break. Your buildings won't break, nothing like that will break. Only things related to the player or any scripts you insert will probably break if you aren't already accommodating for filtering enabled. And filtering enabled allows for a lot of different benefits in your games. Obviously, anti-exploiting for sure. It allows people to not destroy the entire map and ruin the gameplay for others. It usually stops people from exploiting their characters' health or other things like that. So it's pretty helpful for anti-exploiting, and it has scripting uses as well, as it can make certain things appear on only a certain player's screen, which can be used for cool effects, but can also be used for practical scripting uses like um, lowering lag by displaying bullets only on people's computers that need to see them, for example. The best way I can explain filtering enabled is there's two parts to the game. There's the server side and the client side. And the client side includes everybody that's playing the game, and everyone has their own client side. And the server side is where everyone is connecting to. So you can simulate this by going to the test at the top here and going over to here and setting up a server. Now we only need one, and it doesn't matter if you do local server or whatever. And you just do one player, how many players you want to simulate in the game, and you hit start. And it'll start doing all this. And since you have here, I have two new screens. I have the server screen, as you can see in the top, and the player screen right here. And I'm going to put these side by side, and we can see here in the server that our player exists right there, and in the server, or in the client, you can move around, you can see on the server that it's replicated. You'll see a slight delay though if you pay really attention. The server updates to what the client is doing. So things will happen slightly less because there's a simulated, in this version, there's a very simulated slow amount of lag, basically, because in the real time, when you're actually running a server, the clients will have to go through an internet connection to reach the server and display that information to others. So they'll be able to lag. And in Studio, there's options to simulate that lag. And I think the default is very short, like 0.02 or something in terms of seconds I'm talking about. So what we can see here, I'm going to try and get a good angle here so you can differentiate. We'll say the left side is the server, and this right side is obviously the client, and you can see how different things affect it. So I can still, because I'm in Studio, I can still do things that scripts may do. So if I insert a part here, we can see that the part is clearly there. We can, we can change its size, etc., etc. But over here on the server, well, that part's not there. Even if we have basically the same camera angle, we don't see that part. But if the player stands on it, he is floating, because in his world, he's floating. He's not floating. He's standing on something. And in the server, it thinks, well, the player is doing something that allows him to stand here, so let's display him there. So a better way to explain that is basically in filtering enabled, the server always trusts the client's location. So if you want to do effects like flying, running, animations, all of that can be done client side, no worries, because the server will always trust the client's location. But it won't trust other things like instances. So this is an instant because it's an instance, it's a part. The server doesn't trust it, doesn't believe it's there. The opposite is true as well. If we put that same part in server, well, the server sees it and the client sees it, because the client is always going to trust the server. If the client deletes this part, the part still exists, because the server does not trust the action of the client destroying that part. But clearly the player doesn't think it's there, and because movement is always localized, we can walk through this part. On the left, as you see here, I'm walking right through it. That's because the player isn't running into it because it doesn't exist on its screen. So this can allow for many different cool effects. I originally, the first time I used it to create cages on players that only those players could be stuck in. For example, if I made a wall here, this player will be constantly walking to this wall, but on the server, I just look like I'm performing some nice mime trick, So that's really what filtering enabled is. It allows you to not trust each other from client to server, but allow trust from server to client. Another example for how trusting each other works on clients and servers is if we're talking about exploiters again, and an exploiter uses something to change their health. Let's say where's health here? We make their health, like 1,000, and then obviously change their normal health to 1,000 as well. In their world, they'd think, "Oh, awesome! I'm God tier now. No one can hurt me." But if you look on the server, they still maintain that health of 100. So while the server does trust the movement of the player, it doesn't trust any changes that the server makes to itself, other than position and rotation, because there's a movement. So I know I rambled a bit and said some things pretty fast, kind of stumbled over my words. Let me summarize real quick. The client will always trust what the server is saying when something on the server happens, but the server will only trust movement on the player's part. When the player does something moving around the map, the server will trust it, but if the player changes something, the server will not trust it. If the server changes something, the client will always trust it. There's no worries there. So let's actually get in game here. I'm back to my old outfit. People may have noticed I've changed my avatar quite a bit, but I gotta bring it back to the roots for the scripting tutorials here. So let's build something in filtering enabled, or let's create a script for filtering enabled. I'm thinking something really basic is the player creating a little tool that allows them to explode things when they click them. No specific name of this. I guess you could call it some kind of instantaneous rocket launcher or whatever you really want it to be, but there'll be no projectiles. There will only be an explosion because that's really easy. So all the things I'm putting in here, I've put in anything that requires filtering enabled will probably require three different things. A server script, or also listed as just script, a local script, and a remote event. The remote event allows the local script to send information to this script. So basically script-to-script communication, but can only be done on filtering enabled, or that is required for filtering enabled. So let's set up something really simple here. We can get the player's mouse here by local mouse equals, or actually let's start with this. Local play equal game.players.local player. I don't know if I've ever used this code before. I'm sure I have in my Fireball video, but this just references the player because it's going to be important for input, because the client side is really about inputting information that the server can then handle. So next we want to get that input specifically. There's two ways to use that: user input service, which I might cover one day, but for something simple like this, I'll just use the mouse, even though it's deprecated, meaning they'll probably never update it again. But it'll work fine because I don't think they'll ever break it. So you can just do play get mouse, because we know it's the same thing as game.players.local player get mouse. And once you have the mouse has a bunch of different events that fire in it, and one of them is button one down. I think that's correct. So if we connect that to an empty function here, we can do print high, and we'll disable and re-enable that. And as we click with the thing, you can see that it outputs high, and then it counts up now. That's a new change since my last videos, is when there's new input in the output window, I guess, if it's the same thing, it'll only count itself up so it doesn't spam you. We want to get the information for making an explosion where we clicked. We just need the information of where we clicked. So that little point would be mouse.hit.p. So the mouse is obviously your mouse. The hit, mouse.hit, refers to where the mouse is basically clicking, or where it currently is, but it's in a C-frame value. And C-frame values include position and rotation, and we only need the position. And to get to just position, you just do .p. So that's fine. That's all we need. It's also a vector3 value once you change it to .p. So at this point, all we need to do is pass this information to the server so it can create an explosion. But before that, I might as well just show you what it looks like if you don't do that. So let's make an explosion instance here. So that's really basic. Wherever I click, it should make an explosion, as it is doing. And you'd think, okay, well, why would I use filtering enabled? I only used one script for this. It works fine. Well, if we make sure we have a copy of that, throw it in the starter pack, and we make a server again, you can see the relationship between clients and servers in real time while using a script. Let's get him in camera shot here. So the player has the tool and it's making its explosion, but what's this on the server? The server doesn't reference it at all. The server doesn't care. As you saw, there was no explosions happening on the server. So that's kind of useless if you can make an explosion but you can't hurt anybody with it because it doesn't exist for them. So all we have to do is pass this information now onto the client, or I'm sorry, onto the server so that it registers on the server. And that's where the remote event comes in handy. We have to fire this remote event. So all you have to do is reference that remote event from the local script. So we do script.parent.remote event. As you can see, it's auto-suggested, which knows it's there. And we have to fire it. So you can see that there's multiple fires here. There's fire all clients, fire client, fire server. Because we're in a local script and we're trying to send something to the server, we simply do fire server. If you were in the server and you wanted to send information to clients, you could do fire client or fire all clients, but I'll cover that another time. And now we just have to pass along the arguments that we want to pass along. So we want to pass along point, because point is where we want the explosion to happen. So now we go into the server script here and we reference the exact same thing, script.parent.remote event. And there's a few of these. There's on client and on server event. Because we're taking an event that's going to the server, we'll do on server event. Now, the arguments that are passed along with this function, there's two. Even though we only put in one right here, there will be two arguments. The first one will be the player that fired that remote event. And this can come in handy quite a bit. But we won't be using it right now because it's not that important. But this will be the same player that is referenced right up here. The local player from this script will be the player that is given to the server. And so the other argument we passed along is point, like that. However, keep in mind when passing arguments, it doesn't matter what you name it, so we can just leave it as p. It won't change anything. And let's just copy our code from the local script into the server script. So now it's going to create an explosion at point, but we want to change it to p, of course, because p is top tier. So this should still work. If I reinsert the tool, it should still make its explosions, which is awesome. Let's copy it, throw it in the starter pack, and make a little server here and see if it updates on both screens. Remember, before it only updated on one of the screens because it was only happening on the client on one screen and not happening on the server. Now that we use a remote event to pass that information to the server and the server handles for creating that explosion, we should see the explosion up here on the server, which we are. And as you'll see again, there's a slight delay, of course, but in general it still works, and that means we can finally kill ourselves with it, as we just did. Now, there is one more type of thing that can pass information from the server to the client, and that would be a remote function. I don't use remote functions that often because I feel like they cause a little bit of lag because, see, the remote event takes information from the client and sends it to the server. The remote function takes information from the client, sends it to the server, and the server sends information back. And that can cause lag because there's more networking work that has to be done. But I'll still show you how to use these. They have some things that can be important sometimes. So referencing the remote function from the server script is slightly different, as it's not an event, as this is, you can see it's an event, it's a function, so you have to kind of treat it like one. And I don't think I taught this way how to use functions because they're kind of different, but if you remember when you make functions, you have to type in function first and then like a name of it like pi or something. But because our function is this function right here, we have to reference that instead. So script.parent.remote function.onServerInvoke, because the server is invoking this function. Just leave it like that. And any arguments that are passed along would go right here. So player, we didn't pass any other arguments along, so player is the only one that will be passed along. And what's special about this is it can act exactly like a remote event. I could do this exact same explosion script from here, but this allows you to send some information back to the client, as I said earlier. And so all we have to do is return some information. So let's return x, but right now we don't have anything. X is not set to anything, so we'll just set it to nil. So there's a few things in the workspace that only server scripts can view. One of them is server storage. So if we put a string value in here and called it, code, and let's keep the pi thing going on. We just created a little bit of information inside server storage that only the server can see, and because I'm in Play Solo I can see it, but in general clients won't be able to reference this information. We can send this information back to the client using the remote function. So we'll just say x is equal to game.serverstorage.code.value. And if we go back to this, we'll see that the result is equal to what this returns, so we can just print the result. See, it does tell us pi, and of course our explosions still work, but it is telling us that the code is pi. And if we use this on the actual server, we'll create a real server real quick, but I'll also change one bit of code right here. Actually, let me do this. So now that I changed it a bit, this is still inside the local script. It's going to print the result that the remote function gives us, and right after, it's going to try to reference the same exact bit of information. Remember, like I said, the client can't see that because it's in server storage. So what'll happen is this will then spit out the information pi, because that's what the server's telling the client, but then the client won't be able to reference it, so it'll say nil or probably broken actually. So as we can see, it did break, but it did say pi, because see, if you look on here, server storage doesn't even really have anything in it, but as we can clearly see, it does. That's why it says code is not a valid member of server storage, but the information that we wanted to pass along that required code in server storage was on the server, so the server could see it and give us back that information. That's how remote functions work. Both of these things, remote events and functions, have the ability to be switched and do, fire client and invoke client. I personally don't use them that often, but if I ever have some place where I want one player to make another player see something that only the person he's targeted can see, then I will use the ability for the client to fire a client event for that specific targeted player to see something in their world. I might cover that later, but this is the gist of filtering enabled, and you should want to incorporate it as often as you can. Try to use remote events and functions to their fullest potential, because they will help you stop exploiters. And there's obviously some certain ways that exploiters can get around these. Maybe down the line, I'll give an example of how I make things pretty exploit proof. I used to be not very good at it, but now I'm fairly good at it. So maybe I'll do that. Also, I will be making a scripting extras video soon, and I like it if someone would make some. I'll go through the comments myself, but there'll be some suggestions of what I should make. Usually a tool or a specific script. I like abilities, like special powers. So if you could suggest some ideas like that, that'd be nice. So that's it for this then.